Now, the DRC's government has concluded the first round of peace talks in Nairobi with representatives of several armed groups operating in the Democratic Republic of Congo's violence-torn east. The Congolese Presidency said that talks in Kenya between the DR Congo and government and rebel groups were aimed at ending violence.
This past week, about 30 delegations representing armed groups from DRC Congo's Ituri, North Kivu and South Kivu states, as well as the Congolese government, met in Kenya's capital Nairobi, aimed at ending the DRC violence. Some armed groups snapped the talks. Others could not attend for logistical reasons. Most notably absent was the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, a designated terror organization by Uganda, which operates near the border of the Eastern Congo and Uganda. Another significant player, the M23, left the first day when clashes between its fighters and the Congolese army were reported in the Rutshuru region. Both sides accused each other of starting the fight. In his closing remarks on Wednesday, President Felix Tshisekedi said he hoped armed groups would accept the government's demand to stop fighting and join a track of unity with the Congolese state. According to the United Nations, the DRC violence has left a humanitarian crisis. More than 27 million people are facing food shortages and nearly 5.5 million have been displaced in the eastern parts of the country.
Well, for more on this, we're now joined by Channel Africa producer and one of our regular commentators on African affairs, particularly in the Great Lakes, Nixon Katembo. Mon frère, bonsoir, comment ça va aujourd'hui?
Bonsoir, Peter. Bonsoir à vos spectateurs.
Brilliant. Good to talk to you. When we talk about the DRC, it seems as if there are a number of initiatives happening at the same time. Apart from those structures inside the country as well, including UN-backed influence, then we have the East African community talking about a force that's going to be deployed into the country. And now we have these talks taking place. I just wonder what you make of all of this. Are these initiatives that will bear fruit, particularly this latest round of talks?
I think, Peter, for the number of occasions that we've spoken on this very program, I have said on many occasions that all other initiative that seeks to look for peace in Eastern DRC without looking at underlying factors within the government, especially the structures of the institutions of the state, and then the interest that the neighbor have into the DRC. The DRC is not going to see peace, but also the geopolitical nature of the region, and not only that, the international political economics that accompany this mayhem in the Eastern DRC. So those are the problems that really, you would recall that there are so many forced interventions in the DRC, including over 20,000 MONUSCO personnel on the ground. You have the UN Force Intervention Brigade composed by the South Africa, Malawi, Tanzania, and which are in the DRC as well, including Kenya's own peacekeepers that were deployed in a name of going to assist, bringing about peace in that Eastern DRC. So if you ask me those new initiatives, whether they are going to yield the fruits, I don't think necessarily that they are going to do so, especially if you have a situation where countries like Rwanda, which is a major party to what is going on in the DRC, was absent on those talks. And you'd recall that President Paul Kagame was not part of this latest initiative, although he was part of the inauguration of the DRC into the East African community.
All right, so it's all very well to have talks, and they say rebel groups were there. But I suppose the million-dollar question is, were the ones that matter there?
Indeed, the one that matters were not there, which is the M23. You would recall that they started the war about 3 weeks ago against the Congolese National Army in the hills of Chanzu, near the border with Rwanda and Uganda, in the Ruchuru zone of the North Kivu province. So you have this culture within the Great Lakes region and in East Africa at large. And I am a student of history of that region. And to my knowledge, such a similar occasions have happened across that particular region, especially if you want to look at the NRA history under the leadership of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni in the early 80s to up to 1986 when it took power in Uganda. They had a similar talks led by Moi, President Daniel Arap Moi of Kenya in 1996, in the early 80s, speaking to the leadership in Uganda under Tito Okello at that time. But you'd recall that when the talks were happening in Nairobi, the war was happening on the other side. The similar approach was taken with the RPF. While talks were happening in Arusha, seemingly the agreement being signed with the government of President Juvenal Habyarimana. On the other hand, the RPF was continuing with the war on to the capture of Kigali. And you look at the similar trends happening in Eastern DRC where talks happens, but on the other hand, the M23 launched an attack on a military basis of the Congolese National Army. What that tells you, you have to learn from history that on the other hand, you have people trying to negotiate talks, but on the other, they are advancing military means. So the solution here is to look within the Congolese National Army, whether how structured and institutional, rather security sector reform, whether it has happened in the Congolese National Army to make sure that it meets the challenge of different armed groups that are facing the country and therefore confront them head on. On the other hand, you look at the issue of the way M23 are fighting. These are rebels who were defeated after being defeated by Force Intervention Brigade and the Congolese National Army, which was led by General, the late Colonel Mamadou Ndala. They ran to Uganda and Rwanda. Interestingly, Rwanda put them in the camp. Uganda said that they have actually taken arms and ammunition, whatever armament they were with, and they were living in Uganda as a refugee. Now, that begs the question, how did they gather again arms to launch new attacks against the Congolese National Army? And the latest talk, how are they happening? In which context? Are they trying to engage the government of Uganda and the government of Rwanda to say, hang on, you have these people who ran into your country as refugees as far as the declaration were made. But how comes that they have emerged again in the Congolese national soil, waging another war? Those are questions that are not being asked. So these are critical factors that when you speak of a discussion in Nairobi, you need to engage such a critical question and ask why the M23 is continuously raging, going on about launching new attacks and changing name from RCD to SCNDP to M23. And now they have actually designed a new name, which escaped my mind, which I don't know. And you don't know what was going to happen next. And to my mind, and to my best knowledge of the region, these are just about talks. They are not going to yield the possible solution that the Congolese people so yearn for. And I know for the fact that the Congolese people are yearning for peace. And lastly, in this submission, I would tell you that the M23 at the moment is divided. One group that is led by Jean-Marie Runiga, who is in Kigali, and led by Sultan Makenga. On the other hand, you have another group led by Bertrand Bisimwa, who is based in Kampala. The question is, in the talks, have there been an effort to bring about this M23 group and discuss with them if they are going to engage them in a peace talks? Which M23 is in Nairobi? And who is leading that delegation on behalf of who? On behalf of which faction of the M23? It would be in many circumstances of negotiation to look at first the common factors and making sure that these groups, two groups of the M23 or any other group that is in the DRC, they are brought together under one umbrella and go to the negotiations with one voice. And if they demand, they make those demand as a coherent unit. Secondly, then you have to look at the vested interests of the countries that are hosting them. Currently, there are major rift that we have known between Rwanda and Uganda at the same time. Uganda deployed forces in Eastern DRC. On the other hand, it wanted also to construct roads, albeit in the name of assisting the Congolese DR government to unlock that region for economic activities. But it begs the question, does it make it happy for Kigali to have such an initiative led by Uganda, especially on a route coming from Bunagana up to the capital city, the provincial capital of North Kivu province in Goma? This means if you know the economic setup and the landscape and the layout of the economic routes, you would see that that route, if constructed, it will cut off any trucking from Kigali or from Rwanda going from DRC via Rwanda into Uganda. Rather, there will be a direct link from Goma into Uganda. Therefore, it alienates economic activity on a part of Rwanda. Rwanda won't be happy to have such a road construction made inside the DRC that will benefit Uganda. So you have those dynamics really that need to be discussed at length.
Nixon, you're a student of history, and dare I say that governments in the region have got access to brilliant minds. Now, if you could figure this out, does this mean that they know these issues and they are paying lip service to them and are involved in PR exercises to create the impression that they're trying when they know full well that they're just going around in circles?
Certainly, they are evolving in a PR exercise. Rwanda knows too well what needs to be done. Uganda knows too well what needs to be done. After all, these are one and the same, who have the same history in the same origin of the NRA Bush War that took over Uganda in 1986. So you don't need a rocket science to look far beyond that. These negotiations are not going to yield any result without the political will of those two governments, and including the government of the DRC, to making sure that it also put its act together in terms of institutional framework and institutional reform, including the security sector reform, modernizing its army, equipping its army, and making sure that it faces the challenge if confronted militarily. So these are key critical factors that need to be looked at. But on the other hand, in the question of the East Africa community and the DRC joining East African community, you see a new trend emerging, one that was said to be the Northern Corridor during the said construction of have a standard gauge train from Mombasa to Kampala up to Kigali. Tanzania and Burundi were not so happy. It's as if they were left out of the deal. And you see the same mistakes are being repeated, that same in the kind of negotiations that are currently taking place in having the DRC Peace Talks happening in Nairobi. Burundi, one would recall that the president, Evariste Ndayishimiye, made a statement to journalists that they would also wish to be part of the situation in the DRC, in helping the DRC, in other words, also sending troops there, because Burundi as well have a vested security interest in Eastern DRC, namely in the South Kivu region, where there have been a trade of accusations between Rwanda and Burundi, each one saying that they are harboring rebels to fight each other on the Congolese soil, but rather wanting to invade each other's country. So those are questions now that you need to look at, instead of just looking the DRC in isolation as if it exists without the involvement of its neighbor, namely Burundi, Rwanda, and Uganda.
Nixon, always great talking to you. Insights greatly appreciated. Thank you so much indeed for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that's one of our regular contributors, Great Lakes region in particular, Channel Africa producer Nixon Katembo, saying that he's not very hopeful about this latest round of talks with rebel groups and the DRC government that's taking place at the moment in Kenya. All right, after the break, we often talk about the Rwandan genocide of 1994, but in neighboring Burundi, there's been ethnic massacres that have taken place, particularly 1972, when one remembers the Ikaza. More on that and what a lot of the survivors